in the spirit of, oh, hi, thanks for coming, by the way. In the spirit of Minibar, we want to give a presentation, but we also want to hear from everybody else. We want to be able to open it up to this side of the room because we know each other really, really well. We've fought with each other. We've worked with each other. And we can all listen to each other's stories all the time. But what's really valuable, in my opinion, is what's on this side of the room. Like, I want to hear what you folks have to say. So we decided to make a presentation on fighting, like us fighting with each other. And it's not out of personality or anything like that. It's more like the natural department fights that happen. Like, oh, by the way, let's see. This is, you good? Let's see. This might work better. Here, this is the natural ordering. So I'm Stu, this is Alex and Brianna, and I'm a dev. Alex works in QA, and Brianna works in UX. And there's naturally some fights that happen, especially between QA and dev. Is anybody familiar with that? Like, if you ever had, okay, there it is. They're like, maybe if you work as a designer, have you ever fought with devs? Yeah. Oh, by the way, show of hands, like who here, I just kind of want to see a rough layout, like devs, okay, designers, hey, good, and then, oh boy, quality assurance, hey, there we go, all right, that's good, sweet, all right, so we're all the Hatfields and McCoys in here, this is good. Like, so we wanted to give we wanted to talk about how we fight and also some amazing stuff that people in other departments have done for us that were like really above and beyond, and some things that we have done in our department for other departments that have really gone above and beyond. And then we want to open it up to everyone else to come up with some ideas for what they've done, because I think that would be really rad. So brief definition, right? UX is design, roughly defines the problem, development implements, and quality assurance, would you say, like verifies that the devs were honest, right? Or try to be. And this is the only animation I have in my entire slide, but like, you can see that the more relationships you get with each other, the tighter a knit community you have. And I think on some of the stuff that we've done, it was almost like you were in a band. It was like being back in high school where it was so much fun to work with each other. But there are other times where like, you just have to make a number of tickets and it's just the same old stuff. So, yeah, we want to talk about fights. We want to talk about rad stuff we've done, and we want to talk about rad stuff others have done for us. That's kind of the format. Like, when we're done, we'd like to give it to everyone else. So we want to keep it open. All right, so with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Brianna Como. She is a UX developer.
Designer. Okay, so what should so hi, I'm Brianna. I've been a designer for a long time. I actually started out as a front-end developer too and did Flash way a long time ago. Yay, Flash. And then I got into UX and just loved it, but have always loved the collaboration between the different departments. So, and Stu and I have worked together a lot, and we have fought a lot, as you can imagine, just getting a sense for Stu's personality. Yeah, so my favorite one is we were working on this really complex application, and it's for analysts, like CIA analysts. So these people are super smart. They're not like your average, everyday consumer user. So what happened, what Stu did, which was really awesome, was like, hey, I see we have a lot of dates in this application, you know, like February 15th, 2016. That's a lot of words. Let's do cool Twitter-friendly dates, you know, like 2 days ago or 2 weeks ago or whatever. So, and that's really awesome when devs suggest things like that that make it better for the user. But in this case, those users, that did not make sense to them. Like, their mental model is totally different and they're super precise. And so a specific date with month, day, and year, as ugly as it is, that made more sense to them. So Stu didn't believe me when I said that. And so we had this loud argument in the middle of our open UX floor, And I was finally like, Stu, just call your mom.
Yeah.
Because, do you want to?
No, go for it.
Okay. So, because I knew his mom is a doctor, and I just guessed that she would have similar mental model to an analyst. And so,
Mom? Yeah, I think the dates would be better with relative, and she thinks that they'd be more precise. What do you think? We've fought before.
yeah. But that was a really changing moment for me, too, to just realize that things that are easier for the normal user don't always work for your specific user. And so, it's whose call is it, right? Who knows the user the best? Who's tested it with the user?
You.
Right, I do.
So, let's talk about, so now that we've talked about fighting, let's talk about some stuff that we've done where we've collaborated and see, what kind of stuff we've been able to do from me being a developer and you being UX.
So, same application that I was talking about, it's really complex, and we were making a dashboard with a million things on it, trying to get them all to fit on screen. And so length of fields became really important, if somebody puts in a description and it's really long, it's going to blow up the design. So what Stu did, without me really asking him, was he got me data about how long those fields are, who's using it, how long is the text that they're putting in there, what's the min, the max, what's the best case, what's the worst case, what's the most common, and then I could design for that. Design for the most common, but then test it against the worst case in both directions. So that was really helpful. And since that happened, I've asked other devs for that, and they've been willing. I mean, it's a little bit of work to go get that, but it really, really helps the design. Because, yeah, of course I can design with the perfect length of text, and it's going to look great, right? But once you let users in there, they're going to mess it up. So,
Alex, do you ever mess around with the length of fields?
Oh yeah, that always ends up being the first time the dev ever just goes when they look when the issue base is well, if you enter www, it breaks everything. So yeah, field length always becomes an issue, and it's something that nobody ever thinks about, until it gets to testing, and you end up having to rework everything. It just turns into a huge pain for everybody involved. But
I'll grab. So, all right. So then I think the idea is that devs, we have access to the system mainframe. We can find out all the histogram data and see exactly how long things are. And that could be really useful for designers, especially if you get real data in front of them. Lorem ipsum dolor sedimet. That's not real data. Try to find real data. Work with your designers to try to find the best solution that they can. Another part that I want to briefly go over. Has anybody ever seen a password, a password change mock-up? Have you ever seen one of those where it's great, I know that what you want is to change the password. I know that's what you want, but what about when it loads? What about when it validates? What about when it fails? What about success, right? You see this one little comp, but there's an entire story behind it that you're just not seeing. Brianna and I encountered a situation that was pretty bad with a very complex form, and it was missing a lot of information. And one of the things that we tried to, this was basically the form that you're given in the beginning, and this is what it would actually grow into. But what was in the middle? We don't know. We have no idea what's in the middle. We have absolutely no idea. So one of the things that I did as a developer is I'm a huge fan of these things called finite state machines. Does everybody know what a finite state machine is? Good. And a couple people do, but not very many. So a finite state machine is actually pretty simple. It's a pretty simple idea. You have a state, say a loading screen. That's a state. Now the loading state can finish. That means it goes to another state, which is the display state, I'm showing you the password change form. Then you can beep boop in the form and change your password. Then you click save. Then it goes into another loading state, like I'm trying to save your password. And then from that state, it can go to success, or it can go to failure. If it goes to success, nice work, everybody wins, that's the end of the finite state machine. If it goes to failure, gotta go back to displaying. And that process can happen over and over. So now, like, does everybody kind of understand the idea of states and navigation, right? And it's a finite set of states, right? Finite state machine. So I was so excited to explain this to Brianna. I was like, okay, so you have a finite state machine, and you have this, and it's like this. And she said, whoa, 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 why don't you put it up on a board, right? Just put it up on a whiteboard. So we started putting it up on the whiteboard. Brianna, is it all right if I hand it off to you to talk about it?
So when I joined the project, Stu gave me that thing with, he was like, okay, we have these 3 designs, we're missing like 6 of them. So we started really, really low fidelity. Like I was like, okay, what are all the states? And what do they mean? And we just started with that. So the papers on there are simply the title of the state and a description of it. That's it. And then, yeah. And then we talked about, so then we started drawing like, how do you get from one to the other? And what does the system do? And what does the user do? And we had some, so it started with search fields and turns into these trays with data, like 6 or 8 trays with data. So we had to talk about like, at what point can't you change it anymore? So, and then you can change it. There's a sense of like you enter some stuff and then you preview it to see if you're getting what you want, and then you run the whole thing. And there was business and technology reasons for doing it that way, but it also made it really complicated. So once we had all that, then I did, so the longer pages, we just kept piling stuff on here. The longer pages are wireframes, but they're really simple wireframes. They're not all the elements. They're just like, what does each area do in this state? So like, can you edit it? Can you open it? Can you close it? Is it the view version of it, or is it the like entering the data version?
Does everybody see the finite state machine showing up on this thing? You start from one side and move your way all the way over to the other. This was a really useful way of telling what we don't know.
Yeah.
And envisioning what success actually looks like.
Yep. So, and at the top there, those are the 3 visual designs that we started with, which were actually about like half reality, because there was stuff in there that we weren't going to do or didn't mean anything, or was just like cool looking, but wasn't actually going to work. So once we had all this, oh, do you want to talk about this one? So this is a piece of it. This is just one little tile.
So for the developers, you folks get comps, right? Like you'll get a lot of comps. Once we had the finite state machine like as a prism, almost all of our comps came down where it was like, you're either previewing or you failed previewing or you previewed. You're either searching or you search failed or you searched. Like this makes life so much easier for development and for QA. So once we had that sort of a partnership, it was like finite state machines are these computer science topics where you go from here to here. Once we had that, then we had a lingua franca for every other design that we had. And it was really fun because I felt like you were speaking my language, I was speaking yours. And I would wind up at your desk complaining about things like dates. So you have to be careful. Sometimes you have to be careful. Okay, so then Brianna, have you ever done any rad stuff for QA?
I would say I haven't had the opportunity to work directly with QA as much as I would have liked to. I had a short project where they were sitting right with us, and so they were testing things right there. But back to what we were talking about, it's really nice for QA to kind of surface those different states in the beginning. So maybe not the first round, because we're trying to get the happy path done and approved with the client, but after that, we really need to cover all the states, and QA knows what those are, or how to show me them or whatever, so that is really helpful. And then I would say too, I like to do kind of a visual QA, so if I look at something, I'll know in a second if it's not matching the design. And I'm not talking like I had 15 pixels here, this needs to be 15 pixels exactly. But I am saying there is a rhythm to it and a spacing to it, especially with something that complex, so things need to be consistent. And it's much faster for me to look at it and notice it than someone who's not as familiar with the designs. So those are my two ideal QA interactions.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. You can hit next. So I'm Alex. I'm a software quality assurance engineer for the Nerdery. Been there for about 6 years. So fights with dev. When I started in QA at the Nerdery, QA was 5 people. It wasn't like a real department yet. I mean, it was just starting out. Like, we were like, what's this QA thing? Like, this might work. This might be cool, right? We actually had a program where we gave project managers punch cards, and if they had 5 of their projects go through QA, they got a free lunch. And that was my manager literally just paying. Oh yeah, my manager was just paying that out of pocket of like, no man, I'll eat the $10 if you guys will just go through QA, right? And since then, it's now grown to a real team of 45 people, and it's one of, it's a really solid service and stuff. But so one of the first major fights that we had with dev, and this wasn't just me, but the department as a whole, was there was a status that we had for our tickets that was works for me. So like, you can close a ticket invalid. Sure, it's out of scope. Sure, like, oh, we're not, we're not dealing with this, or like, we just can't do that. The WordPress plugin, that's just how it works. It's not our problem. But then there's works for me. And it was used exactly how you would want to use it as a dev, which is like, works on my machine. And like, there was no, like, they wouldn't like come talk to us about anything or do whatever. They'd just be like, oh, that's a great ticket, works for me. And we're like, but look, but it doesn't. And they're like, well, it works for me. Best solution to that problem was we literally just took that out of our bug base. It was like, nope, you guys, we're losing the privilege of works for me. So that was a lot of fun. But we can actually skip this one. That was just a full ticket where it's like, no, but look, there's a screenshot in there and everything, blah, blah, blah. This one is actually a solution to UX, so I'll come back to this one in a second. But another big fight that we had, with dev was with test documentation. Initially, we had test plans, which were basically just a glorified scope of work that we had the lead developer write. Which, who here loves to write technical documentation about stuff that they've been building? Notice the cheers. So, we would end up getting documentation that wasn't as thorough as we would need. So we'd always come back and be like, no, but what's this thing? But how's this work? How's this? And we're like, fine, no. And eventually we just pushed it onto us. And did you put the TPS slide in there? I think it's the next one.
Oh, that's not.
Oh, nope. That's fine. We'll get to that. That's us working well together.
That's not a fight. We're not fighting. Let's see. Is this? I don't.
Okay, that might not be in there. Anyway.
Let's use our imagination.
Yeah. So imagine a gorgeous spreadsheet that has all the information in the world that you would ever want, right? So QA eventually developed this thing called a TPS report. It had basically like all of the states of the website and each individual test case that we wanted to handle. So QA just ended up taking over the test documentation. But for us to be able to do that, they kind of integrated QA a lot earlier in the project instead of like, UX does their thing, devs do their thing, and then they're like, all right, we got 2 weeks to launch, go. We got in a lot earlier with, before dev even started to kind of start planning all the stuff out and build all the test documentation so that at the end of the day too, we can show the client of like, hey, here are the thousands of things that we did to this product to make sure that it's working well. Oh, go ahead.
That's all right. So it sounds to me like there were a lot of fights that you were having with devs, then your solution to preventing those fights was oddly enough to reduce the freedom of devs. Is that right?
With some things, yes. It also takes things off your plate that you guys shouldn't have to deal with, quite frankly. Like, you should not, if you're working on building this product, you shouldn't have to worry about doing the test documentation. That should be QA's duty. And the other big thing, to go back to the work for me stuff, the one thing that really, really helped with that was when QA and dev started working together. Initially, when we were a faceless name in a bug base, right? We were just that thing that sent you a bunch of emails with everything you did wrong. And what really helped with that is like, hey, hi Stu, you're the developer. I'm Alex, nice to meet you. And actually sitting down with the developer, with your QA engineer, and going over issues that are in the base, or like if you're struggling to figure out something, like if this issue's happening, you can't reproduce it, go talk to him, right? We don't bite. I learned that Stu occasionally bites, but most developers don't. But no, like working directly together is one thing that's a huge win. It ends up making the product a lot better.
I got it now.
So yeah, that's us working together. Yeah, no, so that's probably what, 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. I don't even know the context for that, but somebody sent me that photo the other day. So, no, so then to move on to UX.
Yeah. What has UX done for you?
Yeah, we actually haven't had any problems with UX per se. Our biggest problem was a lack of communication, because we were just two entirely separate departments. They were at the beginning, we were at the end. We didn't communicate at all. We're like, okay, cool. They sent over these, comps or whatever the devs were looking at, but that's it. So the biggest win for us was sitting down with UX and working together with them. And we have like things like, if you want to go back to this, I think it's a slide before this, like we started like sitting down with UX, and like, Brianna or somebody would look at the site and they would just start rattling off issues. So we wouldn't enter like our super long thorough tickets, but it was just like, okay, cool, like, this font should be light, this should be, this should be this should be bold, this should, and going through it, and we were just running through all these issues, because they notice those things in like half a second, because they're the ones that designed it, right? Like QA can look at the documentation and then look at the thing and be like, yeah, no, that's off, but they just instantly know because they were the ones that put it together. So just working with UX and having that conversation makes a huge difference for us. I think that's about all I got.
And I'm just the dev. Like, nice work. All the fights that I have with other folks. I was wondering if it was okay if we open it up to the rest of the room and start, like, if you want to, is anybody up for grabbing a mic and saying, I had a fight with this department, or here's some cool stuff that I've done for another department? Anybody? Yes. Okay, so this is the awkward part where I run down and give.
I think everyone can hear me.
Yes, that's fine. Is that okay?
My only question is, how did you guys interact with product management? Was there a product manager involved kind of in this whole process?
This is a really good question. Like, this is a great one, very perceptive. Actually, like, what we found is, for a while on the project that we were working on, it was very lightly managed, because there was kind of like, we would sort of, because we were working with each other so closely, we would basically we would just tell the manager, here's what's going on, here's what our timetables look like. We would basically just tell them what the situation on the ground was for all of our stand-ups. And because the fire was going, you only need to throw some logs on it in terms of funding and talking to the client. It seemed to be pretty light. We were very lucky. At other times, it comes down. And sometimes I feel as a developer that our distance actually increases from each other as management begins to like assign tickets and the workflow becomes the thing that actually happens. So just by walking over to each other's desks all the time, saying, hey, how's it going? Mind if I fix some bugs with you? Is that okay? Like, that really helps reduce the amount of work that a manager has to do. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, just it helps set the context.
Yes.
Of what you guys are working on.
That's a really good question. I was thinking about that because I didn't have anything from management up here. It's all been just like UX, QA, and dev, right? Yeah.
So on that particular project, like Stu said, it was like a beta or a prototype for a couple of years. So we had a ton of freedom to work together and go directly from design into development. We didn't have to like get comps approved and then build them. They just built them, and then we showed the client. But then it started to change to a real piece of software that people were using, and so our process changed quite a bit. And the client was actually we were here, they were in Kansas City, so they actually started to get more nervous about what we were doing, what we were just throwing into the system. So we had to adapt with that. So what I did was set up weekly design meetings. So not to add more formality to it, just whatever we're working on at the time, we just show it to him at that point, and the devs are there, and the devs can speak up in front of the client. I think so. You're talking about product management. I'm kind of combining, because we had a project manager who was pretty hands off. He did the weekly billing and not much more than that, honestly. But then our client had a scrum master, and our client was like the main stakeholder. So I forgot where I was going with that, but I like to have is at least formality that we need. So I prefer to have the devs in the room when we show the designs to the client. We show them where we are at the time. We have enough presentation materials to explain the story, but that's it. And then if Stu disagrees with something or has which of course he will, you know, or has some insight or a different way, he can say that in front of the client. And then
That might not be a good
but I think in most cases it's good for the client to see how we work together and whose call something is. So like for the date, for instance, since I knew the user mental model, that would be my call. And I think it's okay in some cases for the client to see that happen versus us having like 10 meetings to get ready for the client presentation is just too much.
So if you guys didn't have a PM, how did you like handle user stories? Was that just handed to you at the beginning and then?
So the question is, if we didn't have a PM, how do we handle user stories? Like, how do we? I think what usually kicked these things off is that we would actually visit the client. Folks would get in a plane and they would go down to the client, from my understanding, and then there would be this huge 3-day long like meeting of the minds that would happen. I'm like, we want to have this cool search form that then evolves into a full analysis, right? And then we'd have to kind of figure that out. And then what would happen is then everyone would go on vacation, leaving the remainder back at, you know, in the lighthouse to figure out how to fill out the rest of the finite state machine. So I think what happened eventually is that because there was so much trust between development and UX, that you could just kind of show that to the client or show that to your product manager, and that trust would seem to, like, I think they eventually actually just trusted us. With the meetings that we would set up, weekly meetings, we just like, this is kind of what we're working on. This is what progress looks like. And yeah, I mean, sometimes we wound up in the woods. That's no joke. Like, sometimes you wind up in the woods and like, I think this thing took like 3 or 4 months. But when it came out, it was really rad. They were very happy with it.
I just wanted to add one more thing. So they did add a Scrum Master and stories, and I was UX was actually embedded, so I had my own stories, and we had to use TFS, which is the worst.
Anybody else? You?
QA getting that next at all with the client meetings?
Yeah.
So it really depends on the project, the nerdery. Initially, no, we did not, but that's something that we've been working to fix, because when you end up with that chain of communication, you know, things get lost, or, you know, things aren't clearly stated, and that just, it always ends up becoming an issue. So we really strive, we've been moving towards like an embedded QA model where we're involved since, you know, before the scope of work is even signed, right? You know, we're getting in there on the estimates and stuff like that, and then we're making sure that our QA lead is involved in those client meetings and that we're there from A to Z. You know, it helps give us a better idea of the project as a whole, too.
And other folks? You.
So how much testing you do as a dev?
Oh, that's a really good question. Like, I'm not the best at QA. So one of the things that I personally am not a shining example of writing the best unit tests. I wish I was, or integration tests. But one of the things that I found that really helps QA out a lot for testing is actually, I'm a big fan of Selenium. I like to actually have repetitive tasks done by Selenium, which is, I think, like a WebDriver where you can basically just make it click on things, right? And because QA is often doing the same thing over and over and over, if you create a battery of very basic tests, what's cool is, did you hear Alex, you mentioned the testing framework spreadsheet, the TPS. You can actually put those programs into the TPS. So you can say, step 1 is you gotta log in. Click the login Selenium driver and it automatically logs in. And then you have to go to this form. Click the thing on Selenium that takes you there. So those things can be really, really helpful, and they reduce cost for QA. But I don't write enough unit tests. Like, I'm not as good as I should be. Does that help answer your question? Okay. Alex, you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I got one quick thing on that. So Selenium is great. There's like there is the like kind of Chrome extension where you can, or Firefox extension where you can just kind of hit play and just be like, try to record my steps, and it will like try to record what you do and then be able to replicate it. And you can export that as code in like C#, Ruby, Python, a couple other languages I'm I can't think of right now, but you can export it, but the code's not very good if you try to export it. It's a lot better if you just manually write it yourself. But one of the big fights that I had with dev is I was learning automation, right? So I was like, yeah, I know Python, you know, right? So I was like, I'm gonna write the script because I need to submit this form like 1,500 times to change some data on the homepage, right? On this product we've been testing forever. So I was talking to the dev about it, and I was like, this isn't gonna like crash anything or destroy anything, you know? And he's like, no, you should be good. It'll be perfect, right? So I wrote my first automated script. I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm a developer now, right? So I made the rookie mistake of hitting run, and I was like, oh, now I gotta go to class at Normandale. So I left my desk. And I'm sitting down in class, and I get a text message from the dev, and he's like, hey, Alex, how you doing? I was like, good. And he's like, you didn't turn off email notifications, did you? So I open my phone, and my inbox is just blowing up with all of these, and they're also sent to the dev because he was like the owner of the form that I was submitting, right? So I basically just sent both of us a couple thousand emails, and Google's like, slow your roll here, buddy. So then Google started throttling the emails, so it was only sending like about 1 a minute or so. So it was just like, now you're just gonna get these emails for the next like 2 days. It's fine, don't worry about it. So we're both just trying to frantically set up a filter and stuff like that. So that's a lot of fun, but Selenium's great to help cut down costs, if you use it correctly.
You do. Nice. Okay, in the back?
Yeah, I was wondering, do you handle risk as a team when deadlines get moved up and the requirements, all the requirements aren't going to be in the release, in terms of where you're going to cut back on either requirements, QA testing, or is that dictated to you?
I'm going to go with, does everybody understand the question? What do we do? It sounds like, what do we do when constraints are placed upon us, right? Generally, I have lived my life trying to just be not the sergeant, but like that wise-cracking private that's, I don't know, Sarge, I don't know, but if you ask me, it's going to be like this. I'm not a lead. I've never really wanted to be in charge. So for me, usually they're dictated to me. I'm given marching orders. If I can show the client proof of concept or something that we've worked on, something clear, oftentimes they'll bite. But usually, I'm not the person who tries to enforce the constraints. Does anybody, yeah?
I would say from a design perspective, it's really good to just have language to decide what you're going to do. Because in most cases, I would say what's better for the user takes more time to develop, in most cases. So I think it's good for us to be like, okay, this is quick and dirty, let's just get it out there. And then I can feel okay about myself, you know? Or we're going to improve it later, or whatever it is. So from a design perspective, we just need to know why we're doing it the way we're doing it, and if we intend to revisit it or not. Or like, you know, if it's quick and dirty, let's get it out there and test it with users later and validate that it's the right solution. But was your question more about technology?
Well, I probably should have prefaced it with, are the applications you're designing small to mid-sized enterprise that are replicated for individual customers, or are they, is it one large enterprise product that's rolled out to multiple customers?
We've had a huge mix, right? I don't know. So the project that Stu and I showed, how wide was that one?
I call that one medium. It was
Yeah.
a full-on web app. You know, it was a full-on web app that had spans like about 6, 7 developers total. Some of them were working on code that was like probably classified.
Yeah.
But like because we work at the shop that we're sort of contracted because we worked at a company called The Nerdery. We would work on so many different projects every week, so it was hard to keep track of the specifics.
Yeah, and I would say in most cases, like, we would want to scale down everything, so keep a little in each bucket. You know, don't totally get rid of QA. Don't totally get rid of design, but maybe scale them back or do them more lean for that instance. But in some cases, we've had to push back, too, and just be like, you know, we can't release it like this. This is going to be terrible.
On that note, have you had any arguments with product management?
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
First of all, there might be a few product managers in this room that I've had fights with. I hope not. Hi, Robert. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, usually, that's actually another great, maybe I should have brought in a product manager to talk about it. Let's see. I can think, would you guys, I'll pass it down this way, but I will come up with a fight that I've had, and usually they're on the lines of, you don't get any hours to work on this, right? You don't get to do this. You just have to finish up these couple of things and you're out. When you might see a potential for something really, really fun. That's typically the, go ahead.
Is that project management or product?
Oh,
Product.
Product?
I think there's a good question for projects or delivery management as well.
Yeah.
I was thinking product.
I think I might have been confused. So define the role.
Define the role.
Yes.
So they could be someone who's representing the problem the customer's having.
Yes.
And who owns the relationship with the customer and all things success with the products at a business level.
Yeah.
And they work with the development team to actually make sure that the products, if there's any information that's coming in that needs to help change the direction of the product, or maybe there's a different feature that was needed. But
I have had a few fights, but it might come down to organizational differences. Usually it's because I might see something with my team very differently than maybe where the client is going. And usually they might actually manifest more with a difference that I have with the client, with a difference in vision. And the product manager is simply on the client side. Right? Oh, who owns it? Yeah. I'm going to pass it down, if that's all right.
I'm actually struggling to think of any examples of fights that I've had with the product manager. Yeah, I mean, like the big engagements that I've worked on that I've really worked with the product manager, it's been very hands-off because we're just like over here doing this one small portion of this thing and this huge product, and they're just kind of like out of sight, out of mind, like, you guys know what you're doing, it's fine. So I haven't had a ton of interactions with product managers, with the clients that, and I can't think of any fights.
I haven't had these personally, but I think UX and product management roles overlap a lot. And sometimes product managers think they know the user because maybe they used to do that role, or they have so much business knowledge that sometimes they think they can speak for the user and they can't. So I think that's one place where we would butt heads a little bit. And then also I've actually been really fortunate to have really good product managers who really know, or product owners who really know the business and the user, but understand that they are not the user, and also write the stories so that the team can use their expertise to solve them, versus being very prescriptive about, just go execute my ideas, I know everything, and don't test. I think that would be probably the worst situation.
So I am a product manager, and I think the issues that I've had with Dev have largely boiled down to miscommunication. And most of the time, I would be saying something that Dev didn't understand, or Dev would be saying something that I didn't understand. And I think what I've found most effective in those situations is to recognize what's going on and take a step back and revisit the definitions and make sure we're all talking on the same page.
Yes.
First one, you're at 37 minutes, and then a comment question. I used to work with all these folks at the Nerdery. I was a solutions engineer, and so I was like pre-sales, like PM, I don't know. And the thing I noticed that came up with QA a lot is that clients and even like account executives do not understand how vital QA is. And often we would turn in estimates that would be way too low with QA. And QA would be like, well, we'll tell them it's 15%, but they'd really be spending like 50% on like a lot of time on QA. And so I guess my question is, how do we make it clear? Like, you're fighting with devs about, it's important we get this fixed. That's pretty clear why it's important. But how do you make it more clear to everyone before that?
Not just devs.
QA is so vital and so necessary, not just some add-on at the end.
So, why does QA matter? That was actually a post in one of our internal like forums at the Nerdery like years and years ago. No, it's a really tough battle to fight. There was actually one client that came to us and we're like, yeah, so, or I guess historically for the Nerdery, like initially we did not sell QA. We just basically took it as overhead and we're like, we're just gonna do this because it makes us better. And then we built that service up into this like real huge, like, you need this is awesome, this is great, like it'll make everything better. But we had one client one time actually say to us, they're like, so what's this QA thing? And we're like, oh, it's our testing after the developers are finished, writing their code and stuff to make sure that everything's functioning as intended. QA will report any bugs that they find so the developers can fix them. The client looks at the salesperson and says, why would your developers code bugs into our product?
That's actually a really good question.
Like, well, this is one thing that I want to touch on too, actually, is like, mistakes happen, right? You guys are writing thousands upon thousands of lines of code. Like, it's impossible to do anything perfect. Like, I guarantee all of us here have cut somebody off at one time or another driving, right? It's just bound to happen. So trying to provide the sales value for that is pretty tough at first. We've been working internally of getting a lot of like documentation and stuff in place and like, here's actually what this value is going to provide you. And things like the TPS report and stuff like that have helped a lot because we can say, look at this thing instead of where it's just, we'll test it and we'll make sure it's good. But like, look at this thing. This is actually what we're going to complete. So we'll show them examples that we've either used on, other clients that, have said it, have given us the okay to show them, or just templates and stuff like that. And also getting QA in those meetings has been a really, really big turnaround for that. Initially, when it was just the salesperson, they'd be like, yeah, they test things and stuff. And then we helped teach sales, and we got in the meetings themselves. And then when we're talking face to face to the client, we can answer all their questions on the spot and help their understanding. So being involved is what helps the most. Oh yeah, no, sorry. Yeah.
That's actually literally a term inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
We've got 10 minutes, folks. I'd like to take your question if that's all right, and then yours. Yep.
I'm going to piggyback off of what you were talking about earlier, and I wanted to ask, when you're first introducing the idea of embedding QA to the other departments internally, not necessarily clients, what are your biggest resistances? Not necessarily like a personal thing, like y'all had or a gunfight and somebody got hit in the back of the head. But more like, hey, I'm on board, but this would suck for everybody else. Maybe the preconception is not great.
So the biggest issue that we had internally of trying to get QA embedded, at the beginning of the process, really came down to just budget. Because we're like, yeah, but we need these hours. And then Dev's like, but then that's taken away from us, and we need that. Or UX is like, but we need that budget, right? So, it all came down, like, really the only internal issues. Like, everyone's like, oh, that sounds great. Like, having QA involved, awesome. Now they're going to know everything. We don't have to give them a whole rundown, every couple of weeks on what's changed and this and that. Like, great, they're involved. That's awesome. But money. That's been the biggest thing. So it all comes down to how we sell it and if we sell enough to be able to allocate those hours.
Yes?
Have you had an instance where you're able to successfully bring in usability? I've noticed in a lot of the teams that I've been on, usability is kind of like, we're going to do it just to validate our own assumptions, and if it doesn't go well, too bad, we're going to go out with it anyways. So, do you have an instance of where that was done more successfully?
Yeah. So, I was at the Nerdery for 3 years, and it came similar to QA. It came down to budget a lot of times. So, my last project I did before I left, we actually tested with users. So it was like an IT issue reporting system for restaurant managers. So if you can imagine, it was like the worst IT garbage on people who don't understand it at all and have no time. So that was like the perfect project where we got to do a bunch of contextual inquiries, sit with them in their tiny back room and see them submit these issues and be super stressed out about, like the POS is down and we can't cook food tonight or whatever. Yeah.
At what point in your process did you do that?
So at the beginning, we started with the contextual inquiry, and we did a lot of that, and then did some collaborative design and development, and then took that working software back to some of those managers. We tried to get different ones that we didn't interview the first time, and tested them in the system. And we tested them in the old and the new, if they were familiar with the old. So then we had a really good benchmark of like, it took them 10 minutes to find it in here, and they hated their lives. And And here they found it quickly, and the reason they found it and those types of things. So, and we recorded that, and so we have all that data. But that really went back to how that project was sold, because there was budget and the client was on board with that plan. Now I'm at 3M, and it's totally built into our process. Like, we have the money to do it. It's in our process. We are required by our creative director to do user testing. She'll say, like, I don't care what you think, you know, you're not the user. So we have to do it every couple of weeks. We do a very rapid design sprint and test.
Thank you.
Yep. You know, like timelines are very critical, like for any project, right? So I've seen in numerous instances where the dev time, you know, it's critical. Like, you know, you have to submit your, you know, by this day, right? Have you tried to submit like a bug import so that you can buy some time out so that QA can discover your bugs? And have you done that? You know, like, you have to submit your code on Sunday or Monday, and you got to crunch in time, and then, you know, try to send a bug import so that QA cannot discover that. And at the same time, you know, you can go and see, you know, what mistake that you have done, and you can buy out some time.
That's a good question. Like, how? Because oftentimes has anybody noticed that devs eat QA's time? Like, you're late to the end, and you ate all their time, so now you don't get as good of a product. What one technique? No, I don't always hit my deadlines. I don't. But one thing I do try to do is literally take my laptop and sit down next to QA while they're QAing, and like actually be sort of like, hey, here's how the system works, here's how it works. I'll be right here fixing your bugs, and I'll respond to any of your questions that you have, instead of being remote. And that helps them get up and running really fast. And sometimes when devs and QA like combine forces, you can find some amazing bugs. Like what happens when you give someone 1,000 rows. Does pagination work, or does it break? No one is going to try to actually make 1,000 customers. But if you actually sit down with your QA department, you can help buy them a lot of time. I don't always hit my timelines, though. I'm not as good at that. You have anything on that? What's the time check, by the way? 5 minutes? So we can take a few more questions if you want. Sure. Yo, yeah. Like, do devs fight with other devs? Oh yeah. Like, what are some things that other devs fight with each other on? I know I'm big into formatting and lint, you know? I check in commented out code, and my team hates them. Yeah, Robert's nodding furiously. They don't like that. So what I try to do to solve that... Oh, yeah. React. Yeah, I think one of the things that I tried to do when I have formatting issues just between team members is like, I don't know about you folks, I'm fine with tabs or spaces. I just want standards. Like, I'd rather work on a team that cares about standards even if I don't agree with them. And when I check in commented out code and I get dinged for it when I make a pull request, the first thing I do is I try to put it in ESLint so we never have that problem again. You know what I mean? Just elevate the standards that are already there so that other people feel that it's not going to be a problem anymore. When it comes to frameworks, that one is almost religious warfare. You know, like, it can get pretty bad pretty quickly. But I'm fine with working on any framework as long as we can solve the interesting problems. You know, I might complain about using Angular 1.x though, right? Like, I don't know, it's just not my jam. The other thing I try to do is make a proof of concept. If I feel that I want to make a thing that's kind of taking the team in a different direction, make it on a branch, prove it out with as much data as you possibly can, and see if the team likes it, right? But like, it goes back to what you were saying, which is communication breakdown. Oftentimes it's just a communication breakdown. Does that help answer your question? That's just for me. Anybody else? Like, yes. Mm-hmm.
Or anybody on the way in agile process to integrate that sort of model successfully, or you really feel that it has to be a 1-to-1 ratio.
to try this one? You've been a manager.
That's a really hard question. Because I have been the UX designer who's pulled in a million directions. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I try to meet my deadlines, I guess. I always meet my deadlines, so you have crappy designers. No. I've done it both ways where I'm actually embedded in the Scrum team. Like I attend the stand-ups, I have tickets assigned to me. I do those things. That works pretty well because then it's clear. You know, then you have some documentation too of what was asked and what was delivered. You know, I would put my comps right in the ticket and put my questions in the ticket or whatever it is. So then at least you'd have some data of like, okay, these last 3 sprints we didn't get designs completed or something, and we need them because there is, you know, you have to move ahead without it, right? Yeah, I don't know. That's really hard. It's hard to not have a dedicated person, but again, that's probably not your decision either. I would suggest documenting it, then you'd have at least have some ammo.
All right, so I think that about wraps it up. But anybody else who has any questions, I'll be sticking around. I can't speak for you folks, but I'll be sticking around out back. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming and talking about fights. I learned a lot. Thank you very much.